Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're tackling, well, one of the truly enduring modern legends, figures that are just instantly recognizable, often pretty terrifying. We're talking about the Men in Black.
Ah, yes, the MIB. Those impeccably dressed, sunglasses-wearing figures, though maybe not always sunglasses in the original tales, who show up seemingly out of nowhere.
Exactly. They're the ones who supposedly appear right after someone's had some kind of paranormal experience, usually UFO related, and their job is basically silence, intimidation, threats, making sure the witness keeps quiet.
They really are a cornerstone, maybe the cornerstone of the whole UFO cover-up idea.
For sure. So for this deep dive, we need to be clear about our approach. The whole "do they exist" question, it's complicated.
It really is.
Yeah.
And honestly, trying to definitively prove or disprove if they're, aliens or government agents or whatever, that's maybe not the most productive path.
Sure.
What we want to do here is dig into how the MIB phenomenon actually works. How did this idea lodge itself so firmly in our culture? We need to look at the evidence, sure, but also the psychology, the cultural anxieties, even actual government actions that might play into it.
It's like peeling an onion, lots of layers.
Exactly. We're exploring how this thing exists as a narrative, as a fear, as maybe even a tactic. It's not just one simple thing.
Okay, and right off the bat, one of the core ideas we found in our research is pretty provocative. It suggests the MID narrative wasn't something people just stumbled upon after scary encounters. It claims the whole thing was, and this is a direct quote, constructed piece by piece. It's a pretty bold statement to start with.
It is. And it forces us to go back to the beginning. If it was constructed, where did the first pieces come from? We need to look at the foundations.
Which takes us back to 1947, the year everything kind of kicked off for modern UFOs.
Right. Roswell, Kenneth Arnold, and also the Maury Island incident near Tacoma, Washington. This is really the ground zero for the MIB template, even if it's flawed.
Okay, Maury Island. Tell us about that. Who was involved?
The main claimant was a guy named Harold Dahl, June 21st, 1947. He said he was out on Puget Sound in a patrol boat, salvaging logs.
Okay.
And he sees these six big donut-shaped aircraft just hovering there. Pretty wild sighting on its own right.
Definitely gets your attention. But that's not the MIB part yet.
No. The crucial part, the part that sets the pattern, happens the next morning. Dahl claims he's at a local diner, and this man approaches him.
Described how?
Just a man in a dark suit. But here's the thing, this man somehow knew everything. Dahl said he recounted the sighting from the day before in perfect detail, stuff only Dahl and his crew would know.
Whoa. Okay, that's creepy. Instant omniscience.
Exactly. And then came the punchline. The man tells Dahl, basically, what you saw, forget it, don't talk about it. If you do, bad things will happen.
The classic warning. So that's the template right there. Sighting, mysterious, knowledgeable visitor, threat, silence enforced.
That's the core structure. It's the blueprint that almost every MIB story follows, consciously or not. Sighting, investigation, intimidation.
But Maury Island got even darker, didn't it? There was a tragic element that made it seem much more real.
There was. Dahl's supervisor, a man named Fred Chrisman, reported the sighting. And the military actually took it seriously enough, or seemed to send investigators. 2 Army A-2 intelligence officers, Captain Davidson and Lieutenant Brown.
They flew out to investigate.
Yes, and supposedly to collect samples of debris that Dahl claimed fell from the craft. They interviewed Dahl and Chrisman.
And then?
Then, on their flight back, July 3rd, their B-25 bomber crashed near Kelso, Washington. Both officers were killed.
Oh, man. So the first guys investigating a potential MIB-related case die in a mysterious crash. That fuels the conspiracy fire like nothing else.
Instantly. It lent the whole story this veneer of genuine, deadly conspiracy. It looked like the powers that be were willing to kill to keep this stuff secret. Suddenly, the man in the suit wasn't just some weirdo in a diner. He represented a lethal threat.
But there's a but coming, isn't there?
There's a huge but. Despite the tragedy, and maybe even partly because of it, the investigation continued. And the official conclusion: the entire Maury Island incident was a hoax.
A hoax? After all that?
A deliberate hoax.
Huh?
Later on, both Dahl and Chrisman actually admitted they made the whole thing up. The photos disappeared, the debris turned out to be ordinary industrial slag. The whole thing fell apart under scrutiny.
So the foundational MIB event is fake. Confirmed fake.
According to the official investigations and subsequent confessions, yes.
Oh.
But here's the truly fascinating part for our deep dive. The concept of the man in the black suit, the silencer, It somehow got decoupled from its discredited source.
The idea was too good to let go of, even if the story it came from was bunk.
Precisely. The facts didn't matter as much as the narrative potential.
Yeah.
The figure itself resonated.
Why do you think that was? Why did that specific image, the dark suit, the quiet threat, catch on so immediately in 47?
Well, think about the time. It's the dawn of the Cold War. Atomic secrets, government secrecy is everywhere, espionage, the Red Scare is starting. There's this pervasive feeling of being watched, of hidden powers operating behind the scenes.
Right, a general atmosphere of paranoia.
Exactly. So when people start seeing inexplicable things in the sky, these flying saucers, the natural question is, if this is real, who's keeping it quiet? The man in black was the perfect answer, ready-made. He personified that faceless, powerful authority everyone already suspected was out there.
He filled a narrative gap.
Perfectly. He tapped into a deep existing anxiety.
Okay, so Murray Island gives us the flawed hoax-based template. Where does the story go next to really solidify this MIB archetype?
That takes us forward a few years to 1953 and the really, quote, strange case of Albert K. Bender.
Bender, okay, I know that name. Founder of the International Flying Saucer Bureau, right? One of the big early UFO groups.
That's him. Based in Connecticut, a factory timekeeper by day, but a very, very enthusiastic UFO researcher by night. The IFSB was actually quite successful, lots of members, newsletter.
But he had kind of an unusual background even before the MIB stuff, didn't he? More than just UFOs.
Oh, definitely. Our sources emphasize this. Bender was deeply involved in supernatural and occult exploration. He talked about receiving telepathic messages. He felt he was being watched long before the alleged MIB visit. He had periods of ill health. He associated with psychic attack. He even tried to organize things like a World Contact Day.
So he was already operating in a world where the paranormal felt very real and personal to him?
Very much so. His reality was already kind of porous, blending mundane life with these intense paranormal preoccupations.
Okay, so what happened in 1953?
Well, Bender had been hinting in his IFSB publication, Space Review, that he was onto something big. He felt he'd possibly solved the flying saucer mystery. People were excited.
And then?
And then, silence. Suddenly, he shuts down the entire IFSB, which was thriving. He puts out this cryptic final message saying the closure was forced on him for a surprising reason and advises others in the field to be extremely cautious.
He just pulled the plug. What did he claim happened?
Later, much later, he described the encounter that supposedly terrified him into silence. He claimed 3 men visited him at his home, his private sanctum, which he called his chamber.
3 men. In black suits.
Black suits, yes, and Homburg hats, apparently. He said they communicated partly telepathically, filled the room with a smell of sulfur, and subjected him to intense psychological pressure, basically confirming his fears about the dangers of his research.
And ordered him to stop.
Ordered him to immediately stop all UFO work, destroy his materials, and never reveal what he had discovered. He claimed the experience left him physically ill, unable to eat for days, utterly terrified.
Okay, that sounds like the template again, but amplified. But there's a twist here too, right? About how the story changed over time.
A major twist.
Mm.
This is crucial. When the event first happened, or shortly after, local newspapers picked up on the IFSB closure. Their interpretation, possibly based on initial vague statements from Bender or just assumptions, was that he'd been visited by run-of-the-mill government officials who told him to knock it off. Mundane secrecy.
Okay, plausible enough for the time.
But then you jump forward almost a decade, to 1962, when Bender finally publishes his own account in a book called Flying Saucers and the 3 Men.
And the story is different.
Radically different. The visitors are no longer vaguely defined officials. They've undergone this incredible transformation in Bender's retelling.
Into what?
Into completely supernatural, otherworldly beings. He described them floating about a foot off the floor. He said their eyes sometimes lit up like flashlight bulbs. It was terrifying, yes, but in a totally different way.
Glowing eyes. Floating. That's not government agents.
Not at all. He eventually claimed they were essentially energy beings, maybe even demonic entities or monsters, from a planet he called Kazik. Vampiric, shadowy creatures. It's 1,000,000 miles away from G-men in suits telling him to be quiet.
Wow. So the story evolves from possible government pressure to literal monsters from space or another dimension. What does that suggest?
Well, it strongly suggests we're looking at something deeply psychological unfolding. This progression, especially the nearly 10-year gap before the full supernatural story emerges, points towards an internal process.
Like his own fears and anxieties were being projected outwards.
Possibly? It could be an interplay of his existing occult beliefs, maybe paranoia fueled by the stress of his research, perhaps even, as some researchers have speculated, a full-blown nervous breakdown or psychotic episode. The MIB became the external form his internal turmoil took.
The persecuting figures he already felt were watching him finally manifested, but they grew stranger and more powerful in his mind over time.
It seems highly likely. The story became less about an objective event and more about Bender's internal state, amplified by the weirdness of the whole UFO subculture.
But even this bizarre, possibly psychological story might have just faded away, right? How did Bender's floating, glowing-eyed monsters become the men in black we think of?
For that, you need the third key figure in this origin story. You need the mythmaker. You need Gray Barker.
Gray Barker, the publisher. He's the one who really blew this up.
Absolutely. Barker was actually a member of Bender's IFSB. When Bender shut it down with that cryptic message, Barker was fascinated. He saw an opportunity. He had a small publishing house focused on, let's say, niche topics.
And he decided Bender's story was his next big hit.
He did. In 1956, he published They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers. This book took Bender's increasingly weird story and launched it into the wider consciousness of UFO enthusiasts and beyond.
And Barker's the one who actually coined the term men in black.
He is. That specific, enduring phrase comes directly from Barker's promotion of the Bender story. But he did something else even more crucial from a narrative perspective.
What was that?
He was the one who deliberately connected the dots, or rather forced the connection, between the Bender mystery in '53 and the already debunked Maury Island incident from '47.
So he took two separate problematic stories.
And wove them together into a single, overarching conspiracy narrative. He created the illusion of a pattern, a hidden hand operating consistently over years, silencing witnesses. Maury Island provided the government angle and the tragic deaths. Bender provided the extreme terror and the order to silence. Barker mashed them together.
Creating something much bigger and more sinister than either story was on its own, that's kind of brilliant in a manipulative way.
It was narrative alchemy, and it worked incredibly well. But it leads us to the really cynical part of the Barker story.
Which is?
The overwhelming evidence suggests Barker wasn't a true believer himself. He wasn't earnestly trying to uncover a conspiracy. He was, by most accounts including his own private admissions, a cynical opportunist and a known hoaxer.
Really? He admitted it?
Privately, yes. He referred to his publications as kooky books and seemed to understand quite well that fear and paranoia sold better than dry facts. He was in it for profit and maybe even his own amusement.
Any specific examples of him hoaxing?
Oh, yeah. He famously collaborated with another prominent ufologist, James Moseley, on various pranks designed to stir up the UFO community. The most infamous was the Straith Letter.
The Straith Letter?
They forged a letter, supposedly on official State Department letterhead, from a fictional official named R.E. Straith. It contained all sorts of confirmations about UFO reality and government contact. They specifically sent it to George Adamski, a very famous UFO contactee at the time, knowing it would cause a huge stir. And it did. Barker loved that kind of chaos.
Wow. So the guy who essentially created the MIB phenomenon as we know it was actively involved in fabricating UFO evidence.
It seems so. It completely reframes the whole origin. You, the listener, need to grasp this. The MIB story didn't bubble up organically from witness testimony. It was largely manufactured, packaged, and marketed by someone who likely didn't believe it himself, specifically to tap into those Cold War fears.
So the legend survives because Barker was a good storyteller and marketer, not because the original cases were solid?
Exactly. The narrative was more powerful than the facts. He took a hoax and a possible psychological breakdown and spun them into a durable American myth. It's a masterclass in how stories can take on a life of their own.
And once that archetype was out there, thanks to Barker, people started seeing MIBs everywhere, right? The reports increased.
Dramatically. And they started conforming to a pattern, a very specific profile that Barker's book essentially laid out.
Okay, let's break down that profile. What do these post-Barker MIB encounters typically look like? What are the recurring details?
Well, the look is iconic, obviously. The black suit, often described as immaculate, maybe slightly old-fashioned, thin black tie, white shirt. And often, though not always, a hat like a Homburg or a fedora. The uniform is key.
But it's more than just the clothes, isn't it? There are weird physical descriptions, too.
Yes, this is where it gets really unsettling. Witnesses consistently report subtly inhuman traits. The skin is a big one, often described as unnaturally pale or waxy, sometimes even like plastic or a doll's skin.
Doll-like skin. Creepy.
Very. Another common detail is a complete lack of facial hair. No eyebrows, no eyelashes. Just smooth, artificial-looking skin. And the lips are often mentioned as being weirdly bright red, like poorly applied lipstick, sometimes described as full and ruby.
It sounds like someone trying to look human, but not quite getting it right, like a bad disguise.
That's the exact impression many witnesses convey. A costume being worn, an imitation.
And their behavior, that's famously contradictory, isn't it? The whole knowledge paradox.
Right, this is maybe the weirdest part. On the one hand, they displayed this impossible, almost godlike knowledge. They know things about the witness they couldn't possibly know, private conversations, unlisted numbers, tiny details of the sighting. It establishes this terrifying authority.
They know your secrets.
Instantly. But then, in the next breath, they show this profound ignorance about the most basic human things. It completely undercuts the all-knowing vibe.
And like what kind of basic things?
Well, there are famous accounts of MIB being utterly baffled by everyday objects. One story has them fascinated by a simple ballpoint pen, asking to examine it like it's some kind of alien artifact.
A Bic pen as high technology.
And the food stories are legendary. The most famous involves an MIB supposedly trying to eat Jell-O and being completely unable to figure out how utensils work, just sort of awkwardly poking at it. Total unfamiliarity with basic motor skills or social customs.
Cosmic knowledge 1 minute, canny result the next. It's absurd, but also deeply strange.
It contributes to that not quite human feeling. And their communication style adds to it.
How do they talk?
Almost always described as a monotone, flat, emotionless, robotic. The language itself is often stilted, sounding scripted or like it's been poorly translated. Sometimes they pause in weird places.
But the message is consistent.
The message is always crystal clear. Shut up. Stop investigating. Forget what you saw. Or else. Delivered with that chilling lack of emotion.
Okay, suit, weird skin, knowledge paradox, monotone threats, anything else that usually comes with them.
The arrival is often noted, usually in big, black, often slightly outdated cars. Classic Cadillacs are mentioned a lot. And afterwards, witnesses often report unpleasant physical symptoms. Splitting headaches, nausea, sometimes even periods of missing time or memory loss around the encounter.
Convenient memory loss, again, helps explain the lack of concrete details later.
Indeed. It all feeds back into the myth's resilience.
So this strange profile solidifies, but it didn't stay static, did it? The stories got even weirder over time, moving into what ufologists call high strangeness.
They absolutely had to escalate. To keep capturing attention in the UFO world, each new MIB story almost needed to be stranger than the last. You couldn't just have guys in suits anymore. They had to become more bizarre.
And who pushed that boundary?
John Keel was a major figure here, especially in the 1960s during the whole Mothman flap in West Virginia. Keel had his own MIB encounters, or believed he did, but he interpreted them very differently. Keel doesn't see them as government agents or simple aliens. He started framing them as demonic supernaturals or ultra-terrestrials. Trickster figures from another dimension, essentially.
Wow. Okay, so not just covering up secrets, but actively messing with our reality?
Exactly. For Keel, MIBs were part of a cosmic deception, psychological warfare waged against humanity for centuries by these non-human intelligences. They weren't silencing witnesses to hide crashed ships. They were manipulating human belief itself. It's a much grander, more paranoid vision.
From government spooks to interdimensional demons, that's quite a leap.
It is. And the absolute peak of this escalating weirdness, the moment it goes completely off the rails into pure surrealism, is probably the Dr. Herbert Hopkins case in 1976.
Hopkins, the medical doctor, what happened to him?
Hopkins claimed he got a phone call from someone identifying himself as a UFO researcher. Okay, fine. But literally moments after he hung up, the doorbell rings, and the same man is standing there. Impossible speed.
Okay, yeah, that's not normal.
And the description of the visitor. Peak high strangeness. Bald. No eyebrows or lashes. Pale plasticky skin. Bright red lipstick smeared on. Like a walking mannequin.
Checks all the weird boxes.
He spoke in the classic monotone, demanded Hopkins destroy his UFO research, specifically about occupant sightings, and then came the truly bizarre finale.
Go on.
The MIB told Hopkins to take a penny out of his pocket. Hopkins did. The MIB told him to watch it. And as Hopkins watched, the penny just dematerialized, faded away into nothing. Then the MIB supposedly vanished too.
The coin just vanished. Okay, we've officially left the realm of government agents.
Completely. That's the ultimate escalation. We've gone from a guy in a suit in a diner who is part of a hoax to Bender's floating monsters to Keel's ultra-terrestrials to a lipstick-wearing entity who can apparently violate basic physics on command.
It really shows that folkloric feedback loop in action. Each storyteller had to top the last one, making the MIB progressively less grounded and more metaphysically bizarre.
Exactly. The narrative demanded increasing strangeness to stay relevant within that subculture.
Which brings us back, inevitably, to evidence. After all these decades, all these stories, what hard proof do we actually have?
That's the stark reality. Despite countless alleged encounters, there's a complete, total, absolute lack of verifiable physical evidence. Zero authenticated photos, zero credible videos, no leftover artifacts, no fingerprints, no stray Homburg hats, nothing.
But the myth persists, stronger than ever in some circles. How?
Because of the brilliant, almost perverse logic built into the myth itself. The MIB's job, within the story, is to eliminate the evidence. They confiscate the photos, they wipe the memories, they silence the witnesses.
So the lack of evidence isn't a flaw in the story.
It's proof the story is true. It shows how effective they are. It creates this perfectly self-sealing, unfalsifiable loop. If you can't find proof of MIBs, it just means they're really, really good at their job. You can't win.
Yeah.
The absence of evidence becomes the evidence.
That's frustrating.
Frustratingly clever. Okay, so if the stories themselves are built on shaky ground and lack proof, let's pivot. Let's look at the people having these experiences and the psychological frameworks we can use, starting with the witness.
Right. We have to bring in cognitive science here. Human memory just isn't a video camera. It's not perfect recall. It's a reconstructive process, especially under stress or fear.
So if you see something truly bizarre and frightening, like a UFO, your memory of it isn't going to be reliable.
Highly unreliable. Your brain tries to make sense of it, fills in gaps, gets influenced by suggestion, by what you already believe, by what you see later in movies or books. And fear itself massively distorts perception.
There's that concept from psychology, weapon focus, right?
Exactly. If someone points a gun at you, you focus intensely on the gun, the source of the threat. You might later have almost no memory of the person's face or what they were wearing. A terrifying, inexplicable encounter, whether it's a light in the sky or a strange person at your door, can induce a similar effect. Your memory becomes fragmented, unreliable, suggestible. And this is amplified by the culture they were in.
Massively. By the 50s and 60s, particularly within the UFO community, there was already this deeply ingrained conspiratorial mindset. People expected secrets, they expected cover-ups.
So when Gray Barker's book came out and gave them the MIB archetype,
it primed them. Witnesses were now culturally conditioned to interpret strange encounters or even just intimidating official visits through that specific MIB lens. Someone knocking on your door asking questions after you reported a sighting could easily become a man in black in your memory, especially if the visit felt vaguely threatening.
It creates that feedback loop again, doesn't it?
A very powerful one. Belief shapes interpretation of experience. The interpreted experience gets shared, reinforcing the belief in the community. Then the next person has an ambiguous experience, and the loop strengthens. Belief generates experiences. Experiences confirm belief. The story sustains itself.
It almost doesn't need a real MIB to keep going.
In many cases, perhaps not. Suggestion, anxiety, and cultural expectation can be incredibly powerful reality shapers.
And looking historically, this figure of the dark, mysterious stranger isn't exactly new, is it?
Not at all. The MIB fits neatly into a very old folkloric archetype. Think about the devil appearing at the crossroads, often depicted as well-dressed, knowledgeable, offering forbidden secrets or demanding silence. Or other dark figures, spectral messengers, agents of fate.
So the MIB is just a modern version of that?
Essentially, yes. Our sources call it a secular technological update of the classic demonic figure. They guard or suppress forbidden knowledge, not about souls or magic, but about hidden technology, aliens, government secrets. They are, in a way, demonology for the atomic age.
Reflecting our modern anxieties about surveillance, secret projects, hidden power structures, instead of religious ones.
Precisely. They embody the fear of the unseen, powerful other who operates in the shadows, updated for a world of Cold War secrecy and technological advancement.
Going back to the individuals, let's reconsider Albert Bender. If we apply a psychological lens, what might have been going on there?
Well, considering his pre-existing occultism, his paranoia, the stress of running the IFSB, the dramatic way he shut it down, the later evolution of his story into literal space monsters. Many researchers lean towards a psychological explanation.
Such as?
It could range from intense paranoia escalating under pressure, maybe a full nervous breakdown. Some have even speculatively suggested symptoms consistent with undiagnosed paranoid schizophrenia, where persecutory delusions can become incredibly vivid and terrifying. The MIB, in this view, were projections of his internal state.
A manifestation of his breakdown.
A powerful symbolic one, perfectly fitting the UFO context he was immersed in.
There's also the idea of the fantasy-prone personality, right?
Yeah.
That some people just have much more vivid inner lives.
Yes, research identifies a small segment of the population who have incredibly rich, detailed fantasy lives. They often have difficulty distinguishing between vivid imagination and external reality. These individuals are statistically more likely to report elaborate paranormal experiences, including alien abductions or encounters with strange entities, because their internal world feels completely real to them.
So some MIB reports might stem from this personality type, sincerely reporting what feels like a real experience, even if it originated internally.
It's certainly a factor to consider in some cases. And one more psychological angle is trauma.
How does trauma fit in?
If someone has a genuinely terrifying experience, maybe they saw something truly inexplicable in the sky, or even something mundane they misinterpreted under stress, the resulting fear and confusion can be overwhelming. Psychological trauma needs structure to be processed.
And the MIB provides that structure.
It can. The MIB becomes a concrete symbol for that abstract terror. Instead of just feeling scared and confused, you now have an agent to blame, a face for the fear. The man in black personifies the trauma, making the incomprehensible slightly more manageable, even if still terrifying. They turn formless dread into a guy in a suit.
Okay, that covers the folklore and psychology angles. But what about the government? We can't talk MIB without talking about potential real-world intelligence operations.
Absolutely not. Because there is a government connection, just maybe not the one that classic conspiracy theories imagine. The simple idea is a secret silence group in the FBI or CIA suppressing UFO truth.
But the reality is more nuanced.
Much more. There's the counterargument, often called the Mirage Man theory, which suggests something more complex was happening.
Which is?
That U.S. intelligence didn't just suppress the UFO myth. In certain strategic situations, they actively used and promoted it as a cover story.
A cover for what?
For testing top-secret aircraft, like spy planes or experimental tech. If people reported strange lights near Area 51, for example, letting them think it was aliens was way better than having them guess it was the U-2 or something even more classified. The UFO myth became a convenient smokescreen.
So they weaponized the folklore that was already out there.
Exactly. And there's a deeply disturbing case study that shows this in action. Paul Benowitz.
Wow, the guy near Kirtland Air Force Base in New Mexico in the late 70s.
Yes. Benowitz was a physicist and inventor. He started picking up weird electronic signals near Kirtland, a major hub for classified aerospace research and nuclear weapons. He convinced himself they were alien communications.
Okay, so far, maybe just a misinterpretation. But then the government got involved directly.
Directly and deceptively. The Air Force Office of Special Investigations, AFOSI, specifically an agent named Richard Doty, didn't just tell Benowitz he was wrong. They leaned in. Doty and others started feeding Benowitz more disinformation. Elaborate, completely fabricated stories about ongoing alien conspiracies, secret underground bases beneath Dulce, complex alien factions, just fueling his existing beliefs, but steering them away from the real classified signals he might have been intercepting.
They deliberately made him seem crazy to discredit him and hide what was really happening at Kirtland?
It was calculated psychological warfare. They used the existing alien mythology to mislead and mentally destabilize him. And tragically, it worked. The constant stream of disinformation contributed heavily to Benowitz having a severe mental breakdown and being hospitalized.
That's chilling. Using the MIB-style mythology as an actual weapon.
It demonstrates that intelligence agencies were absolutely aware of the UFO folklore and were willing to exploit it for counterintelligence purposes.
So were there actual government agents who acted like MIAs? Not aliens, but humans?
Yes. This is where we find a real grain of truth, as the sources put it. Specifically, the 462nd Air Intelligence Service Squadron, AISS.
What did they do?
Their official job included investigating UFO reports for Project Blue Book, but their real, more critical mission was counterintelligence related to protecting Air Force assets. Meanings securing crash sites of experimental aircraft, debriefing witnesses who might have seen classified technology, preventing Soviet espionage, that kind of thing.
And how did they operate?
Often in plain clothes. They were trained interrogators. If someone reported seeing something unusual near a sensitive airbase, agents from the 462nd might very well show up at their door, unannounced, asking pointed questions and strongly advising them to keep quiet about what they saw.
So a plainclothes Air Force intelligence officer telling you to shut up about the weird thing you saw near the base. That sounds an awful lot like the mundane version of an MIB visit.
It's almost certainly the factual basis for many of the less outlandish MIB reports. These were real human agents doing a counterintelligence job whose actions perfectly mirrored the MIB archetype that Barker had already popularized.
So they didn't need to pretend to be MIBs, they just needed to do their job. And the witnesses, primed by the myth, filled in the blanks.
Or, in cases like Benowitz, they actively play the role, leveraging the existing folklore as a tool of disinformation and psychological manipulation. They co-opted the myth.
Okay, so if we look at government files, we won't find a specific Men in Black unit tasked with hushing up aliens.
Correct. No formal MIB file has ever surfaced. But what declassified files do show us are extensive, often illegal, domestic surveillance programs happening during the Cold War.
Like COINTELPRO.
Exactly. The FBI's COINTELPRO program, running from 1956 to 1971, targeted political dissidents, civil rights groups, anti-war activists, and its methods were brutal.
How do they compare to MIB tactics?
Infiltration, psychological warfare, spreading rumors and paranoia, using anonymous threats, harassment, attempting to discredit targets. The parallels are striking. The intimidating, silencing tactics attributed to the fictional MIB were very real tools used by actual U.S. intelligence agencies against American citizens.
So the MIB legend becomes in part a reflection or projection of very real fears about government overreach and suppression during the Cold War.
It seems highly likely. The fear of being watched, silenced, or disappeared by shadowy agents wasn't just sci-fi paranoia for some groups. It was a documented reality. The UFO community might have simply mapped those legitimate anxieties onto their own specific interest area, creating the MIB as a symbol of that state repression.
Which brings us finally to how this whole dark, paranoid legend got completely flipped on its head by pop culture.
Right. The final act. The great cultural inversion. It starts, interestingly enough, with a comic book in 1990.
Lowell Cunningham's The Men in Black.
Yes. And what Cunningham did was genius, in a way. He took the villains of the folklore, these terrifying silencers, and made them the protagonists.
How did that work?
In his version, the MIB were still secret, still wiped memories, but they were doing it for a good reason, protecting humanity from the chaotic truth about aliens living among us. They became a necessary, competent, almost heroic bureaucracy managing the weird.
From sinister oppressors to necessary guardians.
A complete inversion. And then, of course, came the movie.
1997. Men in Black, Tommy Lee Jones, Will Smith. Global phenomenon.
Huge. It took Cunningham's premise and turned it into this slick, funny, action-packed blockbuster. It completely transformed the MIB image for millions, probably billions of people. The dark suits and sunglasses suddenly became cool.
And that key gadget, the neuralizer.
Perfect narrative device. It made the secrecy non-threatening, almost benign. Just a quick flash you forget and everyone's safe. It provided a clean, simple, even comedic explanation for everything, replacing the old paranoia with witty banter and special effects.
So the movie basically overwrote the original myth in the popular imagination.
Completely. This is what we mean by the great inversion. Ask someone today about Men in Black, they're almost certainly thinking of Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones, the heroic agents protecting Earth.
Not Albert Bender's glowing-eyed monsters or the eerie plastic-skinned visitor from the Hopkins case.
Those original figures, rooted in fear and psychological distress and possible counterintelligence games, have been almost entirely erased from mainstream cultural memory, replaced by the cool, competent sci-fi comedy version.
It's fascinating. The MIB went from symbolizing the fear of a government hiding the truth to oppress people,
to embodying the comforting fantasy of a government efficiently managing a truth that's too dangerous for us anyway. It's the ultimate rebranding.
Okay, so let's try to wrap this all up. Answering that initial question, do the Men in Black exist? It really isn't a simple yes or no.
Not at all. As a coherent narrative, the mythology itself is built on incredibly shaky foundations, as we saw. A confessed hoax with Maury Island, a likely psychological breakdown with Bender, all amplified and stitched together by a known prankster, Gray Barker.
The original evidence is weak to non-existent.
Right. But that doesn't mean the MIB phenomenon isn't real in other very significant ways. We have to recognize they exist in at least 3 distinct contexts.
Okay, what are they?
First, they're absolutely real as a folkloric archetype. A potent modern myth that perfectly captured Cold War anxieties about secrecy, surveillance, and hidden power. They tell us a lot about the fears of that era. Second, they were real in a sense as a tactic of disinformation. We know human intelligence agents, guys, from the 4 to 62nd AIS, agents like Richard Doty did, in fact, play the role of the mysterious interrogator, or fed disinformation that mirrored MIB narratives to manipulate targets and protect classified projects.
Right.
Real people acted the part for counterintelligence reasons.
Then the third way.
And third, they are undeniably real as a pop culture icon. Thanks to the movies, MIB is a globally recognized brand, a sci-fi comedy trope that has almost completely overshadowed the original, darker folklore. The heroic fiction is now more culturally present than the disturbing source material.
So they exist as a myth, as a tactic, and as an icon.
Precisely. Which leads to the final thought. The men in black aren't really a physical entity out there waiting to be discovered. They're more like a cultural narrative that needs to be deconstructed.
A story that tells us more about ourselves, our fears, our tendency to believe, the power of narrative, the actions of our governments, and the influence of entertainment than it does about aliens or conspiracies.
Exactly. It's a testament to how a compelling story, born from a mix of hoax, fear, psychology, and real-world intrigue, can evolve and adapt until it becomes, for many, more real and more influential than reality itself.
A truly fascinating journey through layers of myth and reality. Definitely gives you pause, makes you wonder what other powerful narratives are shaping our understanding of the world right now. Something to think about.